what we're going to do today is just have a really simple general chat. And I tell you what would be great, because there's so many people on the call, is if you could use the chat thing if you want to sort of ask questions and things rather than interrupting, because otherwise I think we might get a little bit lost. So use that chat button to if you think of any questions you got right then, and then we'll get to you. And there's a couple of people I want to have a chat. I think Michelle Jenkins is joining us from Film London, who's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on with their initiative. And we're going to, Harriet's agreed to have a word as well, because she's been on the task force that's been working on the BFC guidelines, which I think is really what everyone is waiting for, so that we can actually have hopefully have a definitive set of guidelines. First of all, I'd just say that there's been four different sets of guidelines which have currently been issued. This is, as far as I know, there may be more. In some ways, it would be nice to have one set of guidelines, and I think that when the BFC ones come out, I think most of the councils are definitely going to be looking at those as being the definitive set. But meanwhile, the BEC2 ones certainly, and the other ones, have looked at the draft BFC guidelines and have taken those as the starting point. So they're all pretty much similar. So I wouldn't worry too much about there being loads and loads of guidelines. It's a long, boring process reading through them all. But, and I'm going to issue an information sheet after this, which has got extracts from all of the guidelines, so you can have a look and see. And I've really just lifted out of them the section on locations, which is the only bit which really we're looking at in any detail. The rest of it is all the guidelines really talk about is how to operate your crew, how your crew are expected to behave on set, how they're going to protect each other from COVID. What we're concerned about is the general public, and how your plans to shoot will affect the public and the public's ability to move around and, you know, have access and that sort of thing. Yeah, Harriet's just asked us everyone to mute themselves. That would be great if you could just click the mute button. It's down on the bottom left-hand corner. If you wish to say something, you can unmute and say something, but I'd much rather if you could just type something in the chat thing there, and I'll keep an eye on that throughout this thing, okay? Now, we were taken by surprise slightly a couple of weeks ago when our Prime Minister said that we should go back to work as soon as possible. And if we can work from home, then we should work from home, but otherwise get to work. Now, for filmmakers, that means working in the streets. So from that Monday onwards, we began getting inquiries, and we began getting actual, we want to film on this location, is that possible? At that point, we got in touch with our highways and our parking departments and our parks departments in each of the boroughs and said, what do you think? At that point, we said, okay, well, if we are going to accept any applications to film on the highway, we should come up with some additional terms and conditions, which we would expect people to follow. And these terms and conditions were created in line with the guidelines that we've seen already from the BFC, the draft guidelines. So the draft guidelines that we used, and you've already been sent them. I sent you all those yesterday. The Southwark Additional Terms and Conditions document, which was on page 2 of the information I sent. And that's our initial draft. It's going to change as things progress. And I certainly think it's going to change after the BFC guidelines are finalised. And we want to work with other boroughs. We want to work with Film London to get a definitive set so that we're not all using different ones. So we're very happy indeed to change them in line with whatever's decided on the meeting that Michelle's organising in the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, at least we've got something to go towards. I've noticed that Eugene has just popped in. This is Eugene Strange there, so give us a wave, Eugene. Eugene came to us at the beginning of last week and said, I've got a job for Academy. It's a commercial. He was after a bike shop and needed to work out how to get that shot. He showed us the script in the first instance. At that point, we said, well, we haven't had any responses from our councils yet, so hold on a minute. Quite quickly, Lewisham and Southwark came back and said, yes, okay, using the guidelines that we'd devised. And I said to Eugene, find a location in Southwark, and instantly he came back and said, director wants Islington. So we decided to go ahead with 2 applications. One for a bike shop in Great Suffolk Street in Southwark, and one for a bike shop in Exmouth Market in Islington. On Wednesday, this was the day before the shoot, yeah, traditionally, of course, there's a change of date the couple of days before, which duly happened, and we pulled it forward. So on Thursday morning, the shoot took place in Exmouth Market in Islington. Our highways department in Islington had given their consent on the Wednesday morning, this is the day before, which was great. We were extremely grateful for them for moving so quickly. And I'm glad to say that the conditions that were imposed were relatively straightforward. Though having said that, if we look very carefully and we examine the detail, we can see that there's got to be flexibility around whatever guidelines are used. So I see there that Martin has asked if the boroughs mentioned are just FilmFixer ones or the whole of London. What's happened since that memo was sent out yesterday is that we've been in touch with other boroughs, and Brent is open for business. And 9 of the 14 boroughs that we manage are open for business, okay? So that's 10 in total across London, so that's 1/3 so far. I'm expecting most of them are saying they're going to be open for business on the 1st of June. So it doesn't look like being very long, so I should imagine if they're going to be open for business, they'll be willing to look at proposals or willing to talk to you about any ideas that you may have for locations that you might want to offer your directors. Michelle has joined us, I'm glad to say. So we're going to have a little word from Michelle about what's going on with a sort of a unified pan-London approach. Later on, I'll talk a little bit more about the Eugene shoot, and I might get him to have a word with you about what it was like from his point of view. Is that okay, Eugene? Yeah. Yeah, good, jolly good. Okay, Michelle, can you unmute yourself and say hello?
Morning or afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to see lots of your faces. I haven't seen in a long time. This is really nice. No disrespect to my team, but I see them all the time, and it's really nice to see some other people. Yeah, so I think you're all aware of various bits and pieces, but I'll try and say it all just in case there's some areas that some people have missed out on. So APA put their guidelines out just over a week ago, and they're tweaking them a little bit still, but they're pretty much out there. The broadcasters guidelines came out last Monday, which must caught me slightly by surprise because I wasn't quite expecting to get it straight out there, but they have. And that's fairly generic. And then the third and final one is the BFC guidelines that I think most of you have probably seen the draft of that Andy just referred to. Bear in mind that was a draft. They're now collating around about 600 responses. And I think they'll all be working solidly over the bank holiday weekend to try and collate feedback to the production subgroup led by Kevin Trahey and get the final draft. Now, I've got a pre-meeting. I'm hoping that we'll get the next draft at our recovery meeting next Tuesday. Might be a tough call for them given the bank holiday, but we may get it then. They are really trying to get it done in the next week or so. There's a lot of pressure on them to try and get the final draft out there, and that's why a lot of people are talking about the 1st of June. It's not guaranteed because they do want to make sure the indie sector had a say and had all the responses. They had quite a big response from them last week that they're having to go through now. So they're trying to do it as thoroughly as possible, but as quickly as possible, which is not an easy task, to be fair. So yes, as Andy says, in the next sort of week or so, a lot of the boroughs are waiting for that as a kind of key sort of watershed time when that document's finalised and comes out there, and they're using that as a kind of, okay, we can start ramping up then. That doesn't mean to say that if it comes out the 1st of June, all the boroughs are suddenly open on the 1st of June. It's not necessarily the case. It means they can start using that as a way of arguing the case to reopen and get going again. Most of the boroughs actually are on the other end of a phone. So if you want to chat with somebody about something coming up, then by all means, you know, just get in touch and have a chat. And, you know, Brent has already managed an interior location shoot as well, interestingly. Westminster are still not taking any requests. That's the chief exec level, that they are still not operating as yet. But again, Anushka and the team are trying to sort of constantly put the case forward to see when they can open so they can get going again. From a Film London point of view, as Andy says, we're obviously following what Andy and Eugene were trying to do yesterday, which is really interesting because, of course, the difficulty of writing guidance is it's all theoretical, and until you get out there and practice stuff, it's quite difficult, and we don't have any test phasing time to do anything to check it out, and so it's all very much on paper what we think might work. So what we're trying to do, because the BFC, all the other guidance is there, and that's great, we're not going to conflict with it, we're going to chime with it, but we just want to make it a little bit more public location specific and mostly about London. Although Creative England are also watching what we're doing and likely to adopt the same sort of guidance that we're looking to provide. It's very much an annex to the code of practice that you all know very well and operate by generally. And it's just some of those initial sort of additional checklist scenarios about what do I do in this public space that's COVID? What have I got to check that I've complied with and I'm doing? We'll have a meeting next Wednesday. I've got a executive task force that heads up the filming partnership. It's a working party from that. Plus I've added a bit more borough input, since we've got Andy in on that. We've got Dominic from the Film Office and Jack from Wandsworth in on that as well. Once we've divvied up, sort of worked out the next draft, again, and then taken on board any changes in the BSC guidance, I'm hoping that we'll have something. Again, I'm trying to say definitely by middle of June, if the BFC guidance does come out at the beginning of June. And as Andy says, you know, there'll be a few bits and pieces that probably get cracking before that, which in a way will feed into it, because, you know, what works in practice might make it clear what we can have in the guidelines. We're going to have to keep reviewing those guidelines because government guidance changes all the time, and what we've written is based on what government's saying. So if that does change, then we'll have to make sure that's reflected, and we'll keep changing it until such time where we can go, don't need us anymore, COVID, done, out, finished. So that's the intention.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Michelle. That's a situation of what's happening there with the various government bodies that are trying to come up with a definitive set of guidelines, which is obviously what we all want. However, in practice, let's look at what the guidelines actually say. I think most of you have at least read one of the versions. If not, then obviously we can send them around to you. But in effect, what they mean is that you're going to need to come up with ways to isolate your crew to make sure that they are separated from the public. Now, this is a problem for us because the way the guidelines are set out, it says that you're going to need to provide a sort of a pen, a sort of, you know, fenced off area where your crew can operate. And that's going to be difficult to manage because obviously if the fence that you're using is appearing in shot, you're going to have to move it out of shot. If the space required inside the pen has to give every member of that crew at least a certain amount of square meters, 4 square meters. Now, crew of 10, you're looking at a tennis court. You're going to need to put a tennis court on the street. That's going to be hard. Our highways departments are probably going to take that extremely badly and are probably not going to agree to it, because one thing that we've got from the highways departments is that they're under pressure too. There's an awful lot of extra work being thrown at them with pavement widening and all that sort of thing, which is not, you know, filming is not going to get any extra precedence, I'm afraid. It's going to have the same position it's always had. It is going to be tricky. I think what, in a chatting to people so far, what's become clear is that the choice of location is going to become absolutely critical. You've got to offer to the director a location you can deliver, and you've got to know that you can deliver it, and don't offer up a location that's just not going to be possible. So that means you've got to understand and know what is required. Having said that, the choice of location on yesterday's shoot, I'm just going to bring Eugene in here a little bit to say, you know, what he was looking for and give us a little bit more background, because I think actually looking at a live job, you know, that actually took place is going to be really useful. So I'm going to unmute you, Eugene, if you can have a little chat about what the client wanted and what you knew you had to provide. Okay.
So I was confirmed on the job this time last week, and we were looking for a bike shop and an exterior of the bike shop, a park that our actress was meant to be cycling through, and the house which the actress or the cast member and the partner, it's a family, and the bloke ran a bike shop is the kind of concept, and his bike shop was opening again after lockdown, Vodafone commercial. So the couple were being cast that were a real life couple, so they were being cast to not only appear in it together as a couple, but also for their property to be the house, which negated one of the potential hurdles, although it of course brought up other issues, i.e. they live in a house that's not massive, so that had its own sort of considerations. But the exterior stuff, which was the most pressing, which is why I was speaking to you and finding out which councils were potentially available for this, and obviously, as you said, which councils were open. Some weren't, some are. You've gone through that, don't need to go through that. But predominantly the purpose of finding the location was obviously just finding something that had enough space outside it, and fortunately we managed to hit upon Exmouth Market, where the food market normally is. That part of Exmouth Market, the sort of Rosebery Avenue end, none of the food concessions were open, and about 80% of the businesses were shut as well, which made it a really good place to shoot. That obviously won't last very long, but what we found when we were shooting yesterday, once that location had been chosen, was just, as you discussed, penning in the crew near to the location with some Chapter 8 barriers. Most of the crew followed the guidelines, and we had our agency that were watching on Zoom in an office or in their homes, so they were not on set, so that reduced numbers quite significantly, but made the process a little bit longer because we were waiting for their replies and their feedback, which is always on a bit of a delay. And generally, crew adhered to the guidelines, and it was a relatively smooth shoot. We ended up, for the park, because we needed to shoot with a drone, we ended up at a school with big fields and a road that went through it, rather than a public park on a day like yesterday or today. Public park, cycling through it tracked with a drone equals probably not possible, I'd say, or unless you've got a really, really quiet park. There were still Ealing might have had a park, and Andrew was helpful with suggesting parks, but I just thought that parks are not the best place to be shooting with a drone. So I find private land, and I think where possible, private land is obviously great that you've got space, and big houses are great when you've got that as a potential for your brief. But people are not just going to write scripts in easy locations to shoot. So what is the most sort of pressing of consideration. This is how we do street filming, like you've mentioned, and clearly space is paramount. And the more and more businesses that open, the less space that we're going to have to position our pens. So these are going to be the things that we have to consider moving forward. Does that help?
Yeah, that was great, Eugene. I think Eugene was just talking there about 3 different locations that he was using, which was a park, a house, and this bike shop in a shopping street. All of them have their own challenges, but the only one that we were dealing with was obviously the bike shop exterior. The crew were not in the pen the entire time. That must be said. Obviously, the crew needed to have a degree of flexibility. The pen was there. It cordoned off an area, and the bulk of the crew were in it. Occasionally, some of them stepped out and were doing other work. The ADs were running around as they do. But all of them were maintaining a distance from each other and from the public. The public were actually, there was a shop next to the bike shop, which was a pharmacy, and the public were coming and going to and from that the whole time. We felt that it worked, and it worked because of the location. I think in another place it may not have worked so well. And that's why the one message I want you to get is think really hard about whether or not a location is going to work. And that means that lovely little areas like Exmouth Market, which don't have any traffic, are going to become really important and very useful. So think hard about how that's going to happen, and obviously check with us before you put it forward. I'm just going to talk briefly about what the differences are in the application process. We're expecting people to sign and return a form. It's probably a useful idea now to get Harriet's sort of comment in here. I was expecting the location manager to sign and return the form, but Harriet put forward the suggestion that it should probably be the producer who actually signs and returns that form, because ultimately they have the ability to, well, sack a member of the crew who doesn't actually follow the guidelines, and they are ultimately the one responsible for the whole shoot. So I'm going to, take that on board. Harriet, are you able to unmute? Should we get you in here?
I think it's all about enforcement, and I think we all know that much as we would like to believe that crew follow our word implicitly, they don't. And producers need to be responsible for this, and they need to take it quite seriously. And I don't know what everyone else feels, but I feel like that ultimate agreement of any terms and conditions needs to lie with them.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, Harriet, and I'm very happy to change the form so that it states very clearly that we're expecting a producer to sign it and for it to be returned. It also mentions a method statement or RAMS of some sort, a COVID compliant method statement. So effectively telling us how you're going to operate the crew pen, for want of a better word, how you're going to put the signage up, what you're going to use. The idea being that having a runner with a radio isn't going to work anymore. You're going to need actual physical barriers, because that's going to be less personal interaction with the public. Creating these documents, forwarding it to us so that our highways guys can approve them. All of this takes a little time. We'd love to be able to work at lightning speed, but the councils don't, I'm afraid. So when you present this document to us, obviously, if it's a bit complicated, if things need to be looked at, if our highways teams need to go there and have a look at the site, all that's going to take a while. So if you can do one thing, I know we've said it before, but try and impress upon producers to make up their mind about what location they want quickly, so that you can get it lined up and you've got sufficient time to line it up. it's a frustrating process when you've offered what you think is a working location to a director and they say, nah, show us some more. I think you've got to get a, you know, if you want, get a letter from us saying if you are going to waste any more time in looking, you're not going to have time to set it up. If you want us to send threatening letters to you like that, we can do. I just don't want you to miss the opportunity of getting the permission through because a director is wanting to see more options. A couple more questions that are coming in here. Chapter 8 barriers, yes, absolutely. That is, you know, a requirement that the highways departments are expecting to see. We're not giving fixed lead-in times. The reason being is that every different highways department has a different opinion and every shoot is different too. If this is a straightforward small-scale shoot, we'll turn it around fast because the decision can be made quickly. If it's complicated, no, it won't. It will take longer. And I don't want people to think that there's, you know, set lead-in times. We'll always pull out the stops and do our very best, but you've got to give us a chance as well. If it's a problem, and if you're running up against you know, lead-in time difficulties and that shoot is rapidly approaching, then you have to get some decisions made by the decision makers. Just please give us enough time as well. Some other questions that are coming in. Do we think cones and barrier tape would work for the pen or something more chunky? The guidelines are very unspecific about this, and I think that again you've got to take the location and look at the location and decide whether or not the measures that you're proposing are suitable. In a quiet residential street where you're not expecting a huge amount of footfall, then yeah, some cones would probably be absolutely fine because, you know, there's not many people. But in a street where there's a bit more footfall or where there is a bit more of traffic going past, then cones definitely wouldn't work, and we would expect some Chapter 8, you know, fencing, the big orange stuff, to be put in place. That's certainly what was being used yesterday by the Academy shoot that Eugene was on. Vinny's just asked here, will councils be prepared to suspend more parking bays to accommodate the pen? If it's part of your proposal, then yeah, I think that will be the case. We're hoping that you'll bring less trucks as well, but I know that's a bit of a vain hope, but it would be nice. We're hoping that you're going to be bringing less crew. That's all part of it as well. I don't know whether that's a vain hope. But if you require some suspended bays to use as a holding area and it's in your plan, then it would be a bit churlish of us to turn that down, you know. Certainly in this interim period where there's an awful lot less activity going on, I can't really see a problem with taking out a bit more parking. Having said that, some parking departments are not operational yet. Camden have told us that they're not entertaining any parking requests just yet, though other boroughs are doing so. It's all a bit of a movable feast. I think that Camden will come back on board fairly soon, but we haven't had an indication yet of when. What have we got else here? Eugene mentioned about PPE masks and gloves. This is very much to do with your protection of the crew. I don't think it's something that the councils will be taking upon ourselves to start checking PPE. That's not something we expect. I think that we're expecting you to follow the guidelines yourself on that front. Where our role comes in, just so you know, the film office, our role is to check to make sure that the public are protected as much as possible. When it comes to your own crew, we're leaving that to you. So you've got to make sure that that's the case and that you're doing everything you can under the guidelines to protect your cast and your crew and your employees. And that's your producer's concern. But as a location department and as the Borough Film Office, I think we should be working together to make sure that the general public are protected as much as they possibly can. Nick has asked about, did you clean the location after you shot in there, to Eugene? I'm just going to get Eugene back on again. What was the cleaning regime like on the shoot?
Yeah, I got the locations that we're shooting, the bike shop and the interior residential location, cleaned prior to us going in there and getting it cleaned after we vacate. So yeah, cleaning was definitely a consideration. To be honest, the bike shop wasn't, well, firstly it was dirty. Obviously it has members of public going in and out there all day. It was an open bike shop. It wasn't like a shut bike shop that we resuscitated. Bike shops are enjoying a bounty time at the moment. But they didn't insist on it. It was more me wanting to get it cleaned for our crew and our cast that was entering it. So yeah, we got that cleaned, and likewise the same for the residential location we're using. That's cleaned, and more importantly, I feel getting it cleaned afterwards, after we've all gone, so the owners can know that their place has been cleaned. And as to what sort of level of cleaning it was, I got the mop squad to do a solid 4 hours surface cleaning, pressure washing, but they're both quite small locations. They haven't been doing, I've heard about them, but not seen them, these exploding gases cleaning scenarios that some people are discussing. I haven't seen that. It wasn't that. It was just good old-fashioned elbow grease and regular cleaning products, if that answers the question.
Yeah, yes, that's great. Thanks, Eugene. I think that's the case. Is that this was an open shop that was open to the public, and the owner of the shop, you know, was I'm sure very grateful that he had a full-on spring clean take place under the cost of the film company. But I wouldn't have thought that it would be expected that, you know, that sort of level of cleaning happens after every customer walks into the shop. So why would that happen with the film crew? So I think what we're doing here is we're trying to go beyond the bare minimum. And I think that that's really what Eugene was doing there by arranging for a deep clean before and after the shoot. We've got a request here saying that somebody has said that we must get First Option or another health and safety company to write the RAMs, not the location manager. That's depends on the scale of the shoot, and I think on the budget you've got available. I wouldn't expect First Option or another health and safety company. I certainly wouldn't discount one that had been written by a location manager that knew what they were doing. What I'm not happy with is really shoddy method statements or risk assessments which haven't been put together with enough thought. If it looks like somebody's just done a cut and paste job and is not taking into account the actual location where they're actually planning to film, then yeah, we're going to look at it and go, this isn't sufficient. But First Option and those guys, they've had a lot of experience in this sort of thing. I mean, not obviously in COVID, but they've done a lot of homework. This is their livelihood, so they're specialists. So they do a pretty good job. But we'll take everybody's risk assessment and method statement at face value. We're going to be looking at it and looking to see whether or not it fulfills what we expect. And if it does, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then I'm sorry, but we'll be saying no. And it's our highways departments who are looking at these. Now, when it's a utility company or a construction company that are presenting them with risk assessments and method statements, they are done very professionally. So yes, you are expected to present an extremely professional, well-designed, easy to read, well laid out, you know, diagram saying precisely what it is that you're meant to be doing. But I've seen some excellent ones from location managers, and I don't see that you need to get a specialist involved. Somebody else has asked here, Woodsy has asked, with regards to consultation for closures, etc., are there any guidelines on this? As obviously it might be difficult. Oh, it all depends on the location. It's so difficult to know. When you're talking about consultations, I think you might be talking about talking to the general public. or talking to the residents or the people nearby, absolutely, you're still expected to do that, but you're going to have to maintain social distancing while that happens. So a community engagement plan is going to be part of the method statement that we're expecting to see from you. How are you going to let people know? We're expecting to see a lot more use of signage. So putting up some signage a few days beforehand, chained to a lamppost, of course, or something, might be an idea, because that will get the message across to people better than a letter drop might do. So things like this, we need you to tell us how you're going to make sure that residents and neighbours and people nearby are going to understand that a film shoot's taking place, and that the film shoot is not going to put them in any additional danger. One of the most difficult questions that is on our frequently asked question list that we're compiling at the moment is about what we would do in response to a complaint from a resident saying, I feel I'm being put in additional danger by the presence of a film crew in my street. It's a very difficult one to answer, because it all depends on the ability of that film crew to operate in a way that does not endanger the people that live there. So yes, we're going to be looking very carefully at the way that you do community engagement. Lots of thoughts, and I'd love some ideas from you about the best way of achieving this, and I think we'll get to a consensus before too long about the best way, but I can't give you a definitive answer right now. Michelle's just pointed out that the Film London's putting together a list of companies that are going to be able to help with COVID issues. And Oliver Gore has put together an excellent little list on his website too. So thanks for that, Oliver. It's very helpful. Let's have a look at any more questions here. Oliver has asked actually about a highways application form. Will one need it each time we need a pen? We don't actually do a specific highways application form. What we've got is these additional terms and conditions. They get sent over to highways along with your RAMs, your risk assessment method statement, because they're going to need to approve them. If that pen is positioned on the road, on the pavement, or anywhere that affects the roads and the pavements, then yeah, they're definitely going to be the ones that give the final decision here. So yes, the answer is that a highways application is made, but that highways application is made by us using your standard application and the additional T&Cs. So you don't have to make a new one, at least in our borough. I think in other boroughs you might need to make a separate application. That could be the case, but you'll have to talk to them about that. What else have we got here? Annalise is talking about how these new guidelines affected the schedule. Eugene, did this shoot take significantly longer than it would have done otherwise, do you think?
The difficulty yesterday was because in commercials, obviously this is different for dramas and features to a degree, although it might not be, because I'm sure there's going to be some executives or important people that will be dialing in to watch what's being shot. That already happens on big films anyway. And the process of getting feedback from remote people definitely did slow down the process a bit. The directors will be happy with the take and then go through their usual waiting for the agency and client to approve what they've just shot, which always happens anyway in commercials. But that process just took longer. And the one bit of advice I would have, not that we have much of a say in it, but it really helps not having 10 advertising agency writers and clients on set, particularly when we're trying to have small crews. That's a great thing, and less of their comments about sock color and hairstyles is always welcome. But ability to have maybe one person from the agency on set, I think actually is a good thing, because the whole waiting for answers when, you know, 10 people on Zoom at various different parts of the country or the world are all collaborating on opinion, crew are waiting on location for to wrap or to move to the next location or to move to the next setup, definitely did cost us a bit of time.
Thanks for that, Eugene. I think in general, the answer is going to be, yeah, it's going to take a bit longer, and hopefully your first ADs will take that into account. There's been a bunch of questions here about loading equipment from the pavement into an interior location. That's a tricky one. It's really hard to know exactly how that's going to work. And again, I think it's very dependent on the specifics of that particular location and whether or not there's a significant footfall on the pavement that you're intending to cross, loading equipment in and out. I think that people are moving houses at the moment. People are, you know, getting deliveries. All sorts of things are happening. The pavements are being used in the ways that they've always been used. So I don't think that we'd be expecting you to close a pavement in order to import some equipment. I just simply think that's not something we would expect or anticipate you having to do. However, having said that, of course, if you are going to be occupying a pavement outside a house that's being used as a location, and you are actually using that as a place to hold crew, as a place to hold equipment, as a place that you're occupying, then it may well be that you cannot manage without actually closing that pavement. So you're going to have to assess this very carefully about how you're going to work. Every location is different and every job is different, but we're going to expect you to protect the public and make sure that the public have got a right of way and have got the ability to use the road and can access their homes and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that I hope is a bit of a flimsy answer to a non-committal answer to an almost impossible question, but I don't think it's strictly necessary to close the pavement to load in and out. Okay. Would the pen be considered a temporary structure, so an extra cost, or would they consider this just normal kit due to what's going on? Martin, I really don't think that the highways departments will be waiving any of their costs about, you know, what they're doing is they're using their time to assess all the applications that are coming in, and a utility is expected to pay for their time just as a film company is expected to pay for their time. So I'm afraid I can't see that they will be necessarily waiving costs because of the fact that there's a safety requirement. Usually safety barriers and equipment on the pavement, it does incur a cost. If it's solely barriers, I must say that yesterday we were not asked for a specific extra license for the use of the barriers on Exmouth Market. We were not asked for that by our highways department. So that one went ahead without a specific use of equipment on the pavement thing. Whether they just failed to spot it or whether they just decided, oh, this is a safety barrier, clearly we're not going to charge. I don't want to answer on their behalf, and also I'm a little bit wary of asking the question because they'll go, oh yeah, ka-ching, and we might be in a worse place than we were otherwise. So there we go. Michelle's answered a question there, just saying like, we're looking for at least 2 meters for public to pass. It's on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, you're going to have to try and anticipate leaving 2 meters for the public to pass. One of our highways officers said about pavement diversions, and if you close a pavement expecting the public to walk and use the other side of the street, then that may in itself be causing additional danger to the public, because they'll be on a more crowded pavement on the other side. And if that's the case, they'll say no. They'll refuse that request because they feel that that's too much. However, if it's a quiet street and there's a very low footfall, then closing a pavement might be the best option. So you have to look at it and assess it and ask for our opinion. We may well be able to run the question past highways and ask them, what do you reckon? They're all of them, I think, well, some of them are trying to be helpful. So, you know, hopefully we'll get some response to that. Angus has asked about toilets and catering. Eugene, can I ask you to chip in again on this one?
Was it? I didn't see the question because I'm on my phone. But,
Angus has asked about toilets and catering for the crew. What did you do?
We had a honey wagon, so sort of 1 in, 1 out honey wagon, and catering yesterday. Given we're in central London, we were advised to get our own and put it on the bill, which worked fine. And today we had a red hot box drop off to the house that we were at for breakfast. I think they're doing the same thing for lunch. Individual boxes of food that are then picked up by the crew and eaten and disposed of. And to be honest, you know, all of those things are very well welcome and good meaning, but it's interesting when you're actually putting it into practice where you start drawing the line on touching stuff. You know, who's touched the hot box lid, or you know, were you wearing gloves to touch the hot box lid? There's a world of interesting questions and further questions that come from the whole trying to keep your distance and not touching surface, etc. You know, you do your absolute best. You wipe down everything that you can.
Oops, I think we've lost.
Being mindful of all those.
I think we've lost Eugene there. I'm afraid he disappeared. Just quickly there, I think what was going on was that hotboxing was the case. One thing, Eugene, were people just sorry, technical issues? Were people just eating, you know, standing up? Was that the situation?
Yeah, eating standing up.
Okay, which is obviously on a long shoot day. That hour of being able to slump on the dining bus was always a very welcome thing. I think long term, that's going to be very difficult on a 6-day week type shoot, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if we were having a bigger crew and it was slightly more time to prep, then we would have found a church hall or a school hall or something to enable crew to sit down. As it was, we were typically we were running overtime, so we had a broken lunch, so we didn't have time to have a sit down. There was a sit down that was meant to have been dialed into the day, but we were running over due to the sort of delays I was talking about earlier on. So theoretically we would still be having lunch breaks, and as a location department we'd be finding solutions for people to go and have lunch 2 meters away from each other.
Yeah, that sounds like the really only practical solution there for a bit longer term is to try and find a nice big church hall somewhere nearby where you can actually put tables and chairs with socially distanced, sort of arrangement within there. But it's not going to be easy. And I think that, expecting to find one 6 days a week on a long shoot is going to be really hard to do. Marquees possibly, but again, if you're in central London, where do you put that? We've asked here, David Kedaways has asked, from a health and safety standpoint, will councils be stipulating that there's no set craft services on set? Well, I don't think the councils are necessarily the body that will be policing on set behaviour. It's up to the crew themselves, up to the producer, to guarantee the safety of their employees. Now, if craft services are considered to be a bit of a problem, if it's not going to be possible to operate craft services, then I don't think they will appear. If the producers can find a way of operating them that is safe and that is compliant, then they might. But again, it's in central London. I just can't see that actually happening. I think that's one of the things that will be removed in the interests of keeping the crew as small as possible. Charlotte's had to wave goodbye. Thanks, Charlotte. There we go. Harriet's made a very important point there about the guidelines say that we won't be able to choose certain locations. And I think that that's something, if you can all take away something from this, it's that a lot of locations are simply going to be unviable. You might find something that looks great and is absolutely perfect for the shot, but if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. It's a massive compromise, and it will compromise your ability to provide the best locations, but it's just not going to work. Harriet, I'd love to have your input on this, because I think this goes down to expectations and what we've got to do to manage the expectations of the creatives who are going to be, you know, getting upset if they can't get what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it's slightly unhelpful that we've got so many different guidelines. The BFC ones are certainly hopefully designed to be scaled up or down for film and television, although I think the broadcast ones, as Michelle hinted, slightly broadsided us, that they were in a different format. And although they largely apply to shiny floor studios, OBs, news programmes and things like that, I think there is a risk that producers could choose to use them, not other ones. None of the guidelines are enforceable, but ultimately a producer who comes unstuck on something, and let's say the HSE got involved, they would want to know why they weren't complying with the guidelines when the guidelines have been clearly written to give them best practice. I'm trying to think, you know, the guidelines are to help us with, you know, managing producers and directors, and I think producers are going to have to produce better. They're going to have to keep deadlines in mind. We're going to have less last-minute scripts, less last-minute changes, and that is down to producers to start producing.
Yeah, hey, that's great. Can I just ask another thing? Paul Giordani's asked when the BFC guidelines are out. I know you're aiming for June the 1st, and that's the date that's been bandied around. How realistic is that, do you think?
Well, I think Michelle touched on that. Sam Pariah and she has a couple of scribes are furiously inputting and assessing all the feedback. There is a final reading, I believe, between 1 and 2 on Tuesday of the document, and then the final version is going to DCMS, Public Health England, HSE, or I believe those are the places, but it, you know, government approval. So they are actually looking to get it out by the end of next week. There's a huge amount of pressure for that document from everyone. There is a document floating around on Beck2's website. That document was compiled as input into the BFC, so it's not exactly the same. It can be used for advice, but it won't be what the financiers, the insurance and the producers are looking at. So, you know, anyone who's on film and television really should be looking at the BFC guidelines. Michelle, would you agree?
Yes, in a nutshell. Yeah, that's why we've got this recovery group meeting. Which the recovery group is the BFI group that I'm in, that's the production subgroup who have written the guidance report up to. And our next meeting is next Tuesday, and we're expecting certainly some sort of feedback on what we hope will be the final draft. And yeah, the guys are working, you know, 24/7 almost at the moment to compile it all and get it back, because there is huge pressure from the chair of the recovery group to get out there, because we're very conscious of other countries already having guidance in place. So, but on the other hand, like I say, it's that double-edged sword of trying to be really thorough, make it right, make it work for people, make sure everyone's had an input, but at the same time get the thing going. So yes, we're still aiming for a week or so.
Yeah, I think we all understand it's a really hard job to get consensus across such a wide stakeholder group, and get that happen really fast. And it's understandable that the APA jumped the gun, because obviously the pressure on their members. And I do believe that they took the draft as a starting point, even though, yeah, what we've ended up with is a plethora of different guidelines. Certainly from the local authorities' point of view, we'll be taking the BFC guidelines when they're published as our sort of main, our source of the truth, if you like. But until those guidelines are published, we're going with the draft that you sent out previously, and we'll obviously amend it accordingly as we go along. All of these are changeable. We're going to change our processes once it's Ben again. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, once we've got a consensus across the board. Annalise has asked guidelines, any more indication when the cast rules will be firmed up? That's the same answer really. The cast rules it's part of the huge task which everyone's doing. Jeremy's asked about, should all the crew wear masks? Is this the latest plan? Can you tell us something about that, Michelle?
Sorry, I was half writing there. Sorry, what was the question? Masks.
Should all the crew wear masks? Are they expected all to wear masks?
There's a real debate about masks, because as you know, in the general arena, whatever you've heard from the government on that daily briefing is as much as we've got to go on ourselves. And as you know, PPE in terms of masks, face coverings and the like, and gloves has been, a little bit controversial, and they're still not really pushing it. What we've said in terms of the BFC guidelines and consequently Film London guidelines, hopefully, is kind of the next point of call. The broadcasters guidelines are quite, be really careful with PPE. It's a bit of a last resort. They take it very much further down the line of don't jump to just using a mask, because of all the debate about what type of mask you're using, and also we don't want to take away from the NHS, all the above arguments about how effective it is. And certainly in the outside domain, so outside, it's very disputable about how relevant it is. What we're sort of saying is that the primary thing is to keep 2 meters apart between yourselves and between the public. And on the occasions that you can't, because of course, it takes 2 guys to get a dolly on track. What do they do then? They're closer than 2 meters. There are some extenuating circumstances where some crew will have to go together. Now, there's a few methods that producers could try. They can try some buddying techniques where people work together continuously and they remain together, etc., etc. There's testing that comes up in the BFC guidance as well, but we know that's a little bit way off. So the only things we've really been able to go on is like keep 2 meters, and when you can't, then start introducing face coverings, or mouth and nose coverings, as I've tried to call them, and probably gloves, sanitation facilities really readily available, and crew told that they must continue to wash hands all the time, or alcohol cleanse or whatever it's called. So that's kind of the focus. So it's only kind of when you have to reduce that space that you're working together, you've got to try and time limit it, keep it to a minimum, and the producer needs to manage how that's done and needs to appreciate how crew need to operate sometimes closer together, but then what do they do to protect each other in doing that? And face coverings does come up as one of the methods to try and protect yourselves.
Okay, there's a couple of interesting questions. First of all, Charlie asked about lead-in times, and Karen responded there saying that lead-in times do vary and the size of the shoot enclosures needed impact. But Charlie, everybody, lead-in times is such a critical issue, but what we'd say is give us a call in the earliest possible opportunity, and we can tell you a date by which we're going to need to know more. We'll give you that, because I know that you need to go back to your producers and say to them, I'm going to lose this location unless I get a decision tomorrow. So yes, we want you to speak to us. If we get an application in, and we can start the discussions at that point. We don't want to waste our highways time, our highways department's time, but we do expect you to deal with us in good faith. If there's an application that you think is going to work and you think it's, I want to know if this location is going to work, what do you think? We'll put in that question and we'll say, what do you think? If they come back to us and says, I'm not going to make a decision till I've seen what it actually means, please understand that they've been caught out in the past by saying, yeah, I think that can work if it's only one camera and a small crew. And actually on the day it ends up being like, 50 people or something, and it just isn't going to work. So we do need to know a certain degree of information before a decision can be made. I don't want to have set lead-in times. The reason we don't is because we can do it quickly sometimes. And I think that the smaller units and the more nimble units should be allowed to put in applications later in the day. The other question that David Kenaway asked is about council insurance requirements. Will they change to include specific COVID insurance cover? I haven't heard anything about this yet, and I don't think that will happen because I don't think insurance companies are offering any COVID specific insurance. I haven't seen any anyway. Certainly we haven't had any requests from our councils to examine our public liability insurance cover, so I don't think that will be on the cards. Hugh said, you mentioned 9 of our 14 boroughs are considering applications, which boroughs are not? The ones that just haven't responded to us. Now, whether that's because some of their staff are furloughed or have been put onto other tasks, I don't know, but Croydon have not responded. Havering have not made up their mind. Barnet hasn't made up its mind. Kingston hasn't. So yeah, I think it's those are the ones which we don't know yet. It's all on the information sheet, and by the way, that information sheet is changing, and I'll be sending out a notes document following this meeting, which will go into a bit more detail and will give you some pointers that and some things that we've learned from this discussion. And hopefully we'll be able to, as things change, is maybe have another one of these and learn a bit more as things progress. For me, the example of a real actual shoot which actually took place and actually got approved has been incredibly valuable. It's allowed me to think quite clearly about what we're doing because we've done it. So each one of the jobs that we get in the next few weeks is going to help us learn a bit more about this new world and about the new criteria, the new questions that are going to be asked by the councils and also by the public and also by the film crews. So, everybody, let's continue to share information as much as we possibly can. Let's see here. Stan is asking a really important question here about what's going to happen with the new proposals for pedestrianising big chunks of London. Can anyone shed any light on the proposals to close London and Waterloo bridges and several red routes would have a knock-on effect on borough streets nearby? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a TfL question that we'll put to TfL, hopefully maybe through Film London in due course, and I'll make that official by writing an email to Film London TfL and asking for additional information, which we will share on that one. Harriet said a forum for sharing good practice, absolutely great. I think we've made a start on it with this one, but let's continue this because I think all of us will learn from everybody's experiences, which I think will be really helpful. Susie has asked, on a shoot, who's actually responsible for enforcing new measures required? Is it the location manager, the producer? Will there be some kind of COVID-19 team that is employed to do this? The guidelines go into a lot of detail about this, about responsibility. So I think that rather than just repeat that is to get hold of those draft guidelines if you haven't seen them, or the real ones when they come out, and have a look. But ultimately, of course, the responsibility ends with the producer. the producer is the one that puts their name at the top of the list of where the buck stops. So the producer is ultimately responsible, but the producer should be delegating that responsibility to various members of their team. And yes, there is provision in those guidelines for a specific COVID-19 health and safety monitor, whose job it is to make sure that all of the departments are complying with the regulations and the guidelines. So yeah, have a look at that. Michelle's doing a runner at the moment, so thank you very much, Michelle. That's really, really great for your input there. It's brilliant. And yes, my bookshelf, but do I at least get some credit for my you know, my LPs here? It's I've got a lot of vinyl up there, folks. That's where my shelves are. Look, I think if anyone's got any more questions, let's put them down. But I'm going to sort of be starting to wind this up. Any more questions will be gratefully received. And also, you know, just a great thank you for everyone for turning up. It's been really, really useful. And thanks especially to Eugene for finding time during a busy shoot to give us some input there. It's been incredibly useful, Eugene. So thanks a lot for your input there. He said that's all right. So there we are. Cheers, Eugene. We'll speak to you soon. Yeah, I think we will have another meeting soon. Let's wait and see what happens next week. We're going to begin that process of hopefully coming up with a London-wide response with the meeting that Film London are convening on Thursday. And I think it would be useful for us to share what happens after that meeting so you can have a little look. But what we're looking at all the time is how the boroughs are responding, what they're going to do with applications, how they are looking at things. If we hit some particular brick walls here and there, then we need to share those with you so that you can at least hopefully avoid those next time. Angus said, when are the next BFC guidelines due out? We're hoping for June the 1st is the release date, as we said, but that's not confirmed, and there's an enormous task which they've got to do. So there we go. Paul's just asking there, is it practical to have a crew of more than 20 people with the 2-meter rule? In a location where there's sufficient space, yes, it is. But in a location where there is not sufficient space, no, it isn't. So that's the response there, Paul. Crew size is very much related to the location size, okay? And the guidelines there will make that more clear, okay? Yeah, well, thanks everybody for that. We'll wind up now, and I'll keep this as a mailing list, and we'll send everybody an updated information sheet in probably early next week. Okay, thanks a lot. Cheers then. Bye bye.